I thought I inherited nothing but a worthless, crumbling warehouse. But when I slid open its rusted doors, I stepped into secrets that shattered my marriage, unmasked my sister, and revealed a side of my grandfather I never imagined. What I found inside didn't just change my life, it forced me to choose between silence and the truth that could burn down an empire. And if you love stories where hidden family secrets collide with betrayal and redemption, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Not So Perfect Family 365, where every tale reminds us that even in the darkest families, the truth always finds its way out. The day the will was read, my sister smiled like Manhattan sunlight. Condo on Columbus Avenue, Julia whispered into her phone, already Googling the closest Pilate studio. When the lawyer slid a thin folder toward me, he cleared his throat the way people do right before they hand you a receipt for a mistake. To Victoria Thompson, he said, a condemned warehouse on the river. Richard didn't wait until we got to the parking lot. A warehouse, he barked, his breath coffee bitter. 15 years of marriage and you show up with a tetanus shot. I could taste metal in my mouth. It's what he left me, I said. It's something, he laughed, a harsh clank. It's dead weight, like you. By the time we reached home, the word had calcified. Dead weight at the sink. Dead weight on the sofa. Dead weight standing beside our wedding photo. I packed in silence 2 dresses, the good sweater, my grandmother's rosary I didn't even believe in. He leaned in the doorway like he owned the world. Leave the keys, he said. Your little librarian's salary didn't pay for this roof. Rain stitched the afternoon into one long thread. I dragged my suitcase down the porch steps, felt the bruise of every syllable he'd used to pin me down. Under that heap lived the version of me who believed him quiet, always quiet. But as the bus coughed me toward the river, a different voice, low, steady, unfolded inside my chest, get up. Go. The warehouse crouched at the end of a row of shuttered loading docks, bricks blackened by steam and mistakes. A crooked sign read Riverview Storage in peeled letters. A padlock hung from the door like a tongue. I turned the key the notary gave me. It resisted, corroded and stubborn, until something deep in the mechanism sighed. The shackle popped open without the force I'd braced for, as if an invisible hand had decided I'd suffered enough. Inside, the smell of old oil and wet rope met me like a memory from someone else's childhood. My phone's flashlight pulled a cone out of the dark, tarps layered like fallen sails, dust bright as frost, and a steel crate bolted to the concrete near the office door. My name had been burned into the lid, Victoria. Clean, straight, final. I stared at it the way you stare at a mirror you don't recognize. The rain drummed. I set the suitcase down and sat on a pallet like a pew. The crate waited. I waited back. And because grief arrives with a suitcase of its own, it unpacked a memory right there. Grandpa on a summer porch, a glass of tea sweating through his hand, telling me the Mississippi moved patiently because it could. Strength isn't loud, kiddo, he'd said. It's stubborn. He'd never promised me a condo. He'd taught me to fix a hinge and to read people. The way their eyes tightened when they lied, the way a smile stalled just before the truth. I also remembered the first winter with Richard, a 5th-floor walk-up with bad heat and an aluminum pan we called a skillet. We ate eggs for dinner and he kissed my cold fingers. We'll make anything work, he said into my hair. I believed him the way church people believe bells. Back then I mistook certainty for love and noise for strength. The years sanded those illusions down until tonight, when he split them like kindling. My phone buzzed. Richard, bring the car title you hid, we're not done. Then, answer me. Then nothing, the way a storm pauses before a second wave. Not tonight, I told the dark. My voice sounded new, like I'd borrowed it from a woman who used it for more than apologies. I circled the crate. No visible lock, only a smooth strip of dark metal along the front lip, and a stippled glass tile no bigger than a postage stamp. I wiped it with my sleeve. The tile blinked faintly, a pulse under skin. Cheap theatrics, I thought, until I saw the tiny etching, PM Corp. Grandpa's initials, Peter Michael. The breath I'd been rationing escaped. Outside, a horn wailed on the bridge. The tarps shifted in a draft I couldn't feel. I peeled one back and found the shape of a car, low, proud. The fender, a question held too long. I let the canvas fall, one miracle at a time. The crate wasn't going to open itself. Fine, I whispered. Let's see what's worth a marriage. Hands shook, then steadied. Humiliation has a half-life. It decays into resolve when no one is watching. I set my thumb on the glass tile, expecting nothing except the cold. Outside, something knocked, 3 taps, then silence. A green line raced across the strip, quick as a match, and the latch clicked open under my thumb. The lid lifted with a hiss, like the warehouse itself had been holding its breath for decades. Cold air rolled out, carrying a smell of machine oil and cedar, the kind of scent that could haunt a person if they let it. I braced myself for rusted tools, broken parts, maybe useless junk wrapped in newspaper from the 60s. What I saw instead made my knees weaken. Inside the steel crate lay a velvet pouch the color of dried blood, a thick envelope sealed with wax, and a key fob so polished it caught my flashlight like a jewel. A small emblem glared up at me, Ford Thunderbird. I laughed out loud, raw sound bouncing off concrete walls. "Grandpa, what the hell were you thinking?" My voice cracked halfway between awe and disbelief. Richard's sneer crashed back into my memory. "Your sister gets a condo, you get a dump." He'd be furious if he knew about this. He'd demand control, insist it was his by marriage, claim my pathetic librarian paycheck didn't deserve it. I could almost hear his cold laugh scraping my spine. The velvet pouch felt heavier than it looked. Inside, I found a slender silver key topped with a crown, delicate yet sharp at the edges. Not like any house key I'd ever seen. My hand trembled, imagining it sliding into some hidden lock that only Grandpa knew existed. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and tore open the envelope. His handwriting leapt out, firm and angled. "My dear Victoria, if you are reading this, it means you found what I meant only for you. There is more in this warehouse than anyone realizes. You will be tempted to think of yourself as unlucky, weak, overlooked. Don't. You were chosen because I saw what others never could. When the moment comes, this car will be your door out or your weapon. Choose carefully." My throat tightened, the words blurred as though my tears had soaked the ink. Grandpa had been a man of few phrases, but when he spoke, the room stilled. Now, even from the grave, he managed to silence my doubts. The tarps against the far wall loomed bigger suddenly, like silent guards waiting for a command. I stood, dragging the flashlight beam across the concrete. Dust motes sparked. The shape beneath the tarps curved smooth and proud, unmistakably automotive. My breath caught. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on glass shards left from a broken bulb. With both hands I tugged at the tarp. It resisted, clinging with years of grime until it slipped free with a wet sigh. Black paint, chrome that winked even under layers of dust, white-walled tires. A car so flawless it seemed to hum in the silence. I circled it slowly, hand brushing the fender, cold but alive somehow. My flashlight trembled as if it knew I had no business holding it near something so sacred. Grandpa had told us once about his first big purchase, a Thunderbird he swore he'd sold when Dad was born. But here it stood, waiting like a loyal soldier. "This is impossible," I whispered, pressing my palm flat against the hood. "You're supposed to be gone." My phone buzzed, startling me so bad I almost dropped the light. A text from an unknown number, "Leave the warehouse." Now, the flashlight beam jittered across the windshield. My reflection stared back, soaked hair, swollen eyes, a woman stripped bare. For 15 years I'd been quiet, apologetic, small, and now, I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was uncracked, smooth, smelling faintly of tobacco and time. My fingers traced the seam of the cushion. A tiny groove caught my nail. Heart hammering. I pulled the silver crown-topped key from my pocket. The shape matched perfectly. I slipped it in, turned. A soft click answered and part of the seat shifted open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, a metallic glimmer waited in the dark. The glimmer was a small metal box, gunmetal smooth, engraved with the initials PM. I lifted it from the compartment and felt the weight settle into my palms, a compact gravity with its own weather. Beneath it, neat stacks of bills were banded tight, dollars and euros, old faces and new ones. A thin leather wallet lay beside them and a passport the color of midnight. I cracked the wallet first. A driver's license stared back at me, Victoria Park. My photo, my age, my eyes a shade more certain than I remembered. The passport matched, United States of America over an eagle I'd only ever touched in TSA lines, and inside, clean visas to places I'd mispronounced in geography class. A brass key fob stamped 42 Park Ave, APT 17 slid out next, clinking against a credit card with a name that was almost, but not quite, mine. Tucked behind the bills was a folded card with 6 numbers handwritten across it and the words, "Vault keep separate." "Jesus, Grandpa," I breathed. "Who were you?" The box demanded its turn. When I thumbed the catch, it yielded like it knew me. Nestled in black foam lay a pistol sleek, not much bigger than my palm, a matte black river of purpose. The grip was stippled and warm from the swaddling foam. On the slide, PM again, discreet as a signature. I'd never been the kind of woman who thought in calibers, but the sight of it didn't frighten me the way I expected. It clarified me. On impulse, I checked the magazine full and slipped it back. At the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope waited, the wax stamped with the same initials, the same precise hand on the front, for Victoria when the door opens. I sat on the cracked concrete, crossed my legs like a kid at story time, and broke the seal. "My dear Victoria, if this finds you, I'm not there to argue with you about tea or to remind you a bolt wants patience more than torque. I will say what I should have said earlier and didn't. I didn't sell the Thunderbird, and I didn't just fix machines. I carried things, ideas, blueprints, sometimes people from places that didn't want to give them up. They called it a job. I called it a promise. I looked up at the car, suddenly seeing maps under lacquer, gears hiding teeth of other purposes. The warehouse swallowed my breath and returned it colder. You grew up thinking strength was loud, because the loud folks told you so. You were strong the day you let your sister have the last slice without making a sermon of it. You were strong the winter your father left, and you stood beside your mother like a post driven into frozen ground. I have watched men bark themselves hoarse at the world and break under a secret. I saw you keep a secret and hold. He knew things he couldn't have known unless he had been watching with more than eyes. The car has compartments no manual can find. You found one. There are others. Don't use the money to make yourself small. Don't use the pistol unless there is no other honest way left. Trust slowly. Especially those closest. Not because all of them will fail you, but because the price of surprise is high. Julia's laugh flared in my head. A champagne-bright sound that always meant she'd already won. Richard's voice followed, low and measured the way bankers talk when they want you to sign something you'll regret. I thought of the credit card he'd slid onto our joint account for emergencies, and how the emergencies tended to be his. Golf weekends with clients, a new phone every September, an accidental wire into a brokerage account he'd promised to close. A different ledger had always run beneath our marriage, and I'd pretended not to see the ink. If you want another life, one that fits, you have the beginning of it here. If you want to set a fire, you have Tinder. Either way, you have my blessing. I chose you because steel lives under your silence. Your sister burns hot, you hold heat, they are different metals. The world needs both, but only one can forge a hinge that won't squeal when it matters. I read the paragraph again. Heat rose behind my eyes, and for a moment I was 10, sitting on the summer porch while he showed me how to set a nail without bending it, how to listen to metal as if it had a mood. My phone vibrated across my thigh, an unknown number. I let it ring. A second later, a message. Pick up, Vic, it's Sam. Samantha, the friend who had cried on my couch the spring she lost 2 months of rent and talked me into Venmoing money I never saw again. Richard had called her a leech. I defended her, then watched her Instagram a week in Shalom with a man whose watch cost more than my car. Pick up, the text repeated then. Richard's been asking about you. Don't be stupid, call me. I stared until the screen went dark, then powered the phone off. The warehouse was large enough for my mistakes. I didn't need to invite more inside. I kept reading. Keys, the brass fob is what it says it is. The 6 digits are for the vault. Park the car when you must. Walk away when you must. I am not asking you to be me. I am asking you not to be less than you are because it makes other people comfortable. Whatever you choose, do it with your back straight. Signed simply, PM. I'm not a soldier, I told the letter, my voice small in that cathedral of brick and ghosts. The letter didn't argue. The air felt lighter all the same. I replaced the pistol and cash, kept the passport and keys, and closed the compartment. The seat whispered shut like a confidant. Around me the warehouse had changed color, or maybe it was my eyes. The dark didn't feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like a curtain I could pull. Something clinked in the shadowed office, the old glass of the door rattling in its frame. I swung my light. The office looked like every foreman's office I'd ever seen in movies. Metal desk, crooked blinds, a calendar from a defunct tire company. Dust lay thick on everything except a swath on the desktop wiped clean. Hello, I called, hating how the word rose at the end. No answer. I stepped inside. On the corner of the desk sat a stainless steel thermos, the kind Grandpa had carried to every fishing spot and funeral. I reached out. It was warm. I pulled my hand back as if it had burned me, then touched it again. Warm. In the dust beside it, a note in his blocky writing. Mint and lemon balm. Rest. Tomorrow, work. PM. Grandpa had been dead 3 months. The thermos had no business being warm. The tea had no business smelling like my childhood in a room that should have smelled like rust. I wasn't alone, or I had never been. The Park Avenue key felt like it weighed more than the suitcase I lugged onto the bus. By the time I hit Manhattan, the drizzle had hardened into a cold rain that slicked the streets and blurred the towers into gray teeth. The cabbie squinted at the address on the fob. Nice place, he said, eyes flicking to me in the mirror like he couldn't square my damp coat and swollen eyes with the words Park Avenue. The building loomed classic. Pre-war stone, arched windows, the kind of entrance that makes you straighten your spine whether you mean to or not. I gripped the brass key until it left a bite in my palm and pushed through the revolving door. Good afternoon, MS. Park, the concierge said smoothly, as if I'd just returned from a weekend in the Hamptons instead of fleeing a marriage in the rain. He was older, neat beard, eyes that seemed to hold knowledge he wasn't paid enough to share. It's been some time. I froze. MS. Park, not Thompson, not Richard's wife. Someone else entirely. My throat tightened, but I nodded, forcing a casual smile. Yes, work took me away. The words tasted foreign, but he accepted them with a knowing tilt of his head. Your apartment's been kept in order, he said, handing me the elevator key. Mr. Peter arranged monthly cleaning. You'll find everything ready. The name Peter thudded in my chest. Grandpa had been here, weaving this life while I folded laundry and prayed Richard would come home in a better mood. The elevator opened into silence and soft carpet. Apartment 17 welcomed me with the smell of fresh flowers and polish. When I flicked the lights, I almost staggered. It wasn't just an apartment. It was a world prepared for me. Shelves lined with books I'd longed to read, a wardrobe hung with clothes in my size, but finer than anything I'd owned, a kitchen stocked with my favorite teas and migraine medicine tucked neatly in a cabinet. I wandered through rooms that knew me better than I knew myself. The bedroom curtains matched the quilt my mother once sewed. A photo on the mantel showed Grandpa and me laughing near the Statue of Liberty, an event that never happened but looked real enough to fool anyone. Every detail said, "You belong here." I should have felt gratitude. Instead, a storm rose inside me. 15 years of scraping, apologizing, living small so Richard could tower. And all along, Grandpa had built me a sanctuary, proof I was more than a shadow. Why hadn't he told me? Why the secrets? I found the safe by accident, behind a row of books in the study, the Master and Margarita tilting slightly out of place. I pressed it and the shelf slid back to reveal steel. My hands shook as I keyed in the numbers from the card. Grandpa's birthday. The lock clicked. Inside, folders, photographs, neat stacks of cash. I flipped open the first file and bile rose in my throat. Richard, my Richard, grinning at dinners with women who weren't me, clasping hands with men in suits too sharp to be local bankers, signing papers in languages I couldn't read, receipts for transfers that dwarfed our mortgage. And then Julia, my sister, her hand laced with his across a cafe table, her smile secret and soft. Date stamped 3 years back, the room spun. I pressed a palm to the desk, fighting to breathe. Grandpa had known. He'd collected evidence like a detective building a case. While I folded Julia into holiday photos and Richard into every prayer, Grandpa had been watching them dismantle my life behind my back. I shoved the photos into the folder, anger bleeding through shock. My phone buzzed on the desk, its glow stabbing through the dim. A message from Richard, "We need to talk. Don't make this harder." My laugh was hollow in the quiet apartment. He had no idea how much harder it was about to get. But before I could answer, before I could even think about what to do with the evidence stacked in front of me, a shadow crossed the frosted glass of the apartment door. A knock followed, measured, deliberate. "MS, Park." A voice called softly, my blood iced. No one should know I was here. The knock again, gentler. "MS, Park." The voice carried a lobby hush. I stepped close without breathing and peered through the peephole. The concierge, same neat beard, same patient eyes, held an envelope and a clipboard like a shield. I cracked the door. "Yes, welcome home." He kept his voice low, courteous. "Mr. Peter asked me to deliver this if you returned without notice." A small, apologetic smile. "He said you'd be decisive." My fingers tingled. The envelope was heavy cream, my name in fountain pen ink, Victoria Park. Inside, a bank card embossed with my new name, a smaller seal-stamped note today. No later, 237, and a sliver of plastic the size of a hotel key with the Chase logo etched pale. "How long have you known Mr. Peter?" I asked. "Long enough to learn he cared about doing things properly." He tipped his head. "And about you?" Then, softer, "The car service can be ready in 3 minutes." I almost asked how he knew what I needed before I did. Instead, I nodded. 3 minutes. Chase felt colder than the rain, glass, stone, and a security aura designed to remind you someone else owned the air. A woman in a navy suit scanned my card, then my face. "Box number, 237. She checked a screen, then glanced at me as if I'd answered a riddle. "This way, MS Park." We rode an elevator down past the level where money looks like numbers and into the level where it looks like metal. A guard signed something, I signed something. A second woman produced a long brass key that would have made Grandpa smile. "You'll insert yours when I insert mine," she said. The vault door swung open like a bank commercial. Rows of boxes blinked in the fluorescent light. We stopped at one. She turned her key. I turned mine. The box slid free, and she set it on a table in a small room that smelled like paper and worry. "Press the button when you're done," she said, indicating a red disc near the door. "We'll return to replace the box." I was alone with a rectangle of secrets. The box was sealed with a 4-digit keypad. I typed the 6 numbers from Grandpa's card, then realized my hands were shaking too hard to split decade from day. I exhaled, sorted the sequence into his birth date, and the latch released with a sympathetic sigh. Inside, a metal case and a folder. The case had a combination dial, and beneath it, a shallow groove where a key could rest. I tried the sliver of chase plastic. It slid in, the dial obligingly halted on the numbers I'd just used. The clasps yielded. Documents layered like shale, flow charts, account trees, wire confirmations with sanitized memos, consulting, education grant, logistics. Names that lived on the evening news in the mouths of anchors were reduced to initials attached to IBAN and SWIFT codes. At the bottom, a ledger in Grandpa's angular hand, bridging the blandness with meaning. I read. The lines braided into something you could only call a system. State contracts with padding as thick as winter coats. Payments routed through orphan charities and shell research institutes in Bermuda. Invoices for pipeline valves. My librarian brain tripped over the banal noun, paired to a subledger that spat the surplus into accounts in Liechtenstein and Zurich. Richard's name showed up not as a husband who left a coffee ring on my nightstand, but as an architect, R. Harrison drafting the plumbing of theft. Julia's appeared in wire instructions like a fingerprint smudged but unmistakable. J. Thompson's service fee cross-border compliance. My sister, fluent in a currency that never touched cash. There were photographs too, not gossip, utility. Richard on a yacht with men whose faces I'd seen on magazine covers. Richard exiting a side door of a courthouse at dusk. Handshake with a judge whose smile never reached his eyes. Julia in a boardroom with a man whose foundation sponsored half the city's orchestras. A smaller folder labeled collateral held copies of me. The blood burned from my face. Driver's license scans, payroll stubs from the library, a notarized affidavit. My signature forged clean, naming me manager of a nonprofit I'd never heard of, North River Education LLC. I mouthed the name, flipped to the EIN. LLC funneled grants to the library system I loved, then billed consulting back to shell entities. The punchline, a Swiss account number with me listed as beneficial owner. My chest cinched. They put it in my name. Out loud because the room needed to hear what it was. Richard had always said I didn't understand money. Turns out I understood too well. If the music stopped, the chair with my name on it would be the one filled by an idiot or a criminal. Either would do. I closed my eyes and saw us in year 7. Kitchen light too bright, Richard scrolling statements, while I explained the overdraft from a vet bill. If you could just be more careful, he'd said, gentle in the way a hand is gentle guiding a lamb to a gate. We're vulnerable when you make mistakes. I'd apologized, promised to try harder. I would pay to unsay that apology now. The ledger's last pages were Grandpa's, surgical as an indictment. Arrows drew the short, straight lines men prefer to pretend don't exist. He'd mapped 5 names in block letters, each tied to a spoke that touched everything. A cabinet secretary with a hero's biography. A CEO whose company sold cereal to children. A media owner who could blister or bless. A sitting judge who'd cultivated the word integrity like a houseplant. And a foundation chairman whose philanthropy breathed like perfume over the city. Next to each, Grandpa had written a single word, leverage. I ran my thumb along the paper's edge. If these names went public, markets would lurch, pensions would wobble, the news would be a siren. I pictured the librarian at my old branch, Mrs. Dolly, who stacked paperbacks into pyramids for the kids and shushed with a smile. She'd lose part of her retirement and still show up with cookies. The thought made me angrier than any yacht. The foundation chairman's name snagged my eye, Harold Weinberg. It hummed with familiarity until I heard it inside the concierge's voice, inside the elevator's purr. I pictured the brass plaque beside my building's door, the one I had traced with a fingertip as a girl in a cheap coat might trace a display case. The Weinberg Foundation, Park 42 Trust. My sanctuary. I flipped to the appendix. A page titled Property Listed Assets under that trust. Art, endowments, and residential holdings, including my building, my floor, my door. An arrow from Grandpa's pen connected the trust to a line labeled Overflow Q4, a number I couldn't say out loud without tasting metal, and a handwritten note in the margin, safe but only while you are the fire. I stared at that line until the letters swam. The apartment wasn't just a refuge. It was bait or protection that only held if I ran toward, not away from the secrets it sat on. My phone, which I'd forgotten I'd powered back on, vibrated once in my bag. A new number. No text, just a live call. It buzzed again. I let it go to voicemail. The red light in the ceiling, the camera's patient eye, glowed the way dull animals glow at night. I slid the most volatile pages into the folder inside my coat, replaced everything else exactly as I'd found it, and shut the case. I pressed the red button. The guard reappeared like a stage cue. All set, she asked, hands steady, face unreadable. For now, I said. She pushed the box back into its slot. The vault door began its slow, heavy swing. As the seam narrowed, a man in a gray suit stepped into the gap, smile professional and eyes too warm. "Ms. Park," he said smoothly. "Our manager would love a quick word about an opportunity with your foundation partners at Park 42. I felt the ledger's paper heat like a brand under my coat. The 5 names marched across my skull. The 5th name gleamed on the brass beside my elevator. "Of course," I said, and did not move. The banker's eyes lingered, polite yet waited, before he stepped back to let the vault door close. I exhaled only when the iron sealed with a thunderous sigh. Manager wants a word, maybe harmless, maybe the first tug on a net. Back on Park Avenue, the concierge greeted me as though nothing in the world had shifted. But my coat felt heavier with every step, the folder inside thrumming like a second heartbeat. I barely had time to drop my suitcase in the apartment when the phone rang, the secure line Grandpa had left in the study, rotary shell hiding modern wires. The ring was low, insistent, like it knew better than me. "Hello," my voice cracked. Silence for a breath, then, "Victoria," my sister's voice, Julia, smooth, certain, the kind of tone she used at family dinners when she wanted me to feel small. My grip tightened on the receiver. "How did you get this number?" A faint laugh, humorless. "Did you really think you could vanish behind one of Grandpa's ghosts?" He prepared both of us. "Victoria, you weren't his only project." The room tilted. "What do you mean? You have no idea what you've stepped into," she said. "Richard doesn't even know half of it, but you've just painted a target on your back with fluorescent ink. They'll come for you." "They already have," I whispered. "And Grandpa left me the evidence." That shut her up for a beat. When she spoke again, her words were slower, more careful. "Then you need to decide, are you going to survive with it or burn with it? Maybe I'll burn you with it." My voice surprised even me, sharp, not apologetic. "You think I'm your enemy," Julia snapped. "I was protecting you. Richard, he's not just cheating. He's in bed with people who could erase you without leaving ashes. And if you think Grandpa left you that car, that apartment, that name out of sentiment—" "Stop," I cut her off. "You don't get to twist this. You slept with my husband. You helped him bury me alive in numbers I didn't even know existed." Her breath caught, the mask cracking for a second. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," I said coldly. "And you chose him." The line went dead. I stood in the gilded silence of the apartment, the city's hum pressing at the windows. Betrayal tasted different on the tongue when it wore your sister's perfume. I poured a glass of wine from the bottle Grandpa had left, my hand steady despite the quake in my chest. Out the window, Park Avenue lights blurred in the rain. The apartment felt less like a sanctuary, more like a stage. Every book, every painting, every detail whispered, "Play your part, Victoria." And then a knock at the door, 3 raps, crisp and quick. "Ms. Park." A man's voice, muffled but clear. "Courier from your sister." My hand froze on the stem of the glass. Julia wasn't finished. I didn't move. 3 crisp knocks had a way of turning a luxury apartment into a hallway outside a courtroom. "Courier," the man repeated. "From your sister." Through the peephole, gray windbreaker, messenger bag, laminated badge with a barcode and a name I didn't recognize. I slid the chain, open 2 inches. "Leave it with the desk." Signature required, "Ms. Park." His eyes flicked once to the corner camera's red dot, then back. "Please." I signed V. Park on the smudged screen. He handed over a padded envelope and left without the sales nod couriers used to pretend they're not part of your day. I locked the door, set the envelope on the kitchen island, and waited. The thing about traps is they prefer impatience. When I finally slit the seam with a butter knife, a cheap flip phone slid out along with a keycard and a single page torn from a legal pad, power on only while moving. Bench by the conservatory pond. 800, come alone. J in the corner, smaller, they're sniffing Park 42 lines, don't call me from here. I held the phone like it might bite. Outside, a siren Dopplered up Park, then thinned. I was still deciding whether to go when the doorbell rang again, twice, fast like a code from a childhood game. "Victoria," her voice through wood. "It's me." Every version of my sister stood on the other side of that door. The one who braided my hair so tight I teared up, the one who dared me to jump from the dock, the one who smiled across holiday tables at my husband with secrets in her teeth. I opened. Julia looked wrong, messy hair, makeup smudged, coat half-zipped. Her gaze pinged down the hall and back. "Can I come in?" "No," I said, because the word was new in my mouth and I didn't want to waste it. Then I stepped aside anyway because blood has its own math. She walked to the windows and stared at the rain. "So this is what he built for you," she said quietly. "Of course he did." When she turned, her eyes softened. "Hi, say what you came to say." Her mouth quirked. "Straight lines. Grandpa was right about you." I laughed once dry. "He was right about you too." She flinched. "I didn't come to fight." "You slept with my husband, you laundered money with him, you rewired my life and called it a favor. Help me with the verb." Julia's jaw worked. I came to warn you. The articles Mitchell is preparing will bruise the wrong people. They'll look for the leak. You're not a ghost, Victoria. You never were. You're good. You leave fingerprints. I learned from the best, I said. Remember the Halloween you convinced me to swap costumes so you could win the contest? You took the crown. I got a participation ribbon. She closed her eyes. I was 12. You didn't retire. Silence swelled. Julia reached into her coat and set a slim folder on the table without opening it. That phone I sent, use it when you leave here. Don't bring yours. Don't call from this building. The foundation that owns it, she nodded toward the brass plaque on my memory, isn't just charity, it has ears. I know, I said. Grandpa mapped it. Her eyes flicked. He left you the ledger. He left me a choice. Julia's laugh was small and mean to herself. He always loved your choices. Heat flashed up my neck. No, he loved both of us. He just didn't mistake noise for strength. The words landed between us like a dropped glass. Something in her face collapsed, then reset. I didn't know he'd woven you this deep, she said. I thought if I steered Richard's mess far enough from you. You weren't steering, you were surfing, and you liked the view. Sometimes liking it is how you live with it, she said, voice flat. Sometimes you pretend it's a job because the alternative is being afraid all the time. You could have told me, she shook her head, and make you part of it, put you in that ledger. They already used your name once. Her eyes cut to my coat like she could see the documents pressing heat into my ribs. You found North River. They were going to let me burn for it, I said. When the music stopped. Julia didn't argue. She never argued facts, only terms. Listen, tonight you need to leave the apartment. Use the bench, not this door. We're past ethical puzzles. This is survival. I'm not running, I said. Not now. You think Richard will protect you. Her smile was tired. He protects whatever makes him look righteous. That used to be you. Then it was the portfolio. Now it'll be whoever can delete his name the fastest. Good, I said. Let him run out of erasers. She watched me for a long moment. You've changed. No, I said. I stopped apologizing. Her laugh sounded like grief. That little sister is change. We sat at the island like we had at our mother's counter when rent was late and the power company called twice in the same week. Back then, Julia drew plans on napkins, colleges, cities, futures with sharp edges. I drew lists of books I wanted to read. I don't know when her plans became blueprints for other people's lies. I don't know when my lists became a way to make myself small. Why him? I asked finally. Richard, was it assignment or accident? Assignment, she said then, softer, and accident. She looked at her hands. He was good at pretending to love what he touched. It made him efficient. My stomach rolled. I was a cover. You were a person, she said, and there it was, the crack. I'm sorry, Victoria. Apology fell between us with the weight of a coin tossed into a deep well. I couldn't hear it hit. The flip phone on the counter vibrated, though it was still off. It shouldn't have. Julia's eyes snapped to it. They're pinging, she muttered and moved without thinking, popping the battery like a surgeon. You can't trust anything that wasn't born stupid. Use new cheap and kill them fast. You sound like him, I said. I sound like the people who taught him, she corrected, then glanced at the TV. Turn it on. Why? Just turn it on. I did. The screen washed blue, then filled with a street-side scrum cameras, a courthouse, rain-slicking suits. In the middle of it, Richard, jaw set, coat dark with water, flanked by 2 officers. A Chiron crawled. Major Energy Executive arrested in corruption probe. My breath left hard. It was one thing to imagine it, another to watch it crawl along the bottom of a screen like a headline had the power to summarize a life. I looked at Julia. She didn't look surprised. She looked bored. Don't get sentimental, she said. He'll be at a friend's townhouse by midnight. Tronic bracelet, nice scotch, 2 lawyers who charge per breath. This isn't justice, it's theater. Then what is it? Housekeeping, she said, and a message. She stepped back from the counter, eyes on the door now, body already leaving. They're telling whoever's leaking we can make noise too. Are you the one sending messages? I asked, or delivering them? Tonight, she shrugged. I'm your sister. She nodded at the envelope shaped like a habit I hadn't broken yet. 8 o'clock, don't be early, don't be followed. And if I don't come, then you'll get a different knock. She looked at me like she wished she'd never learned how to. And you won't like who's at the door. She was gone before the anchor finished parsing the words alleged and probe. I stood in my kitchen, the TV's light strobing the stainless steel, the building humming around me like a body breathing in its sleep. On the screen, Richard lifted his chin into the rain. No comment, he said, and stared straight through a camera he'd always assumed would love him. The envelope's instructions burned in my coat pocket all evening. Bench by the conservatory pond. 800, come alone. I dressed in silence, trading silk for dark wool, heels for flats I hadn't worn in years. I slipped Grandpa's small gun into my bag, next to the folder of names and account numbers, then paused. Taking both felt like tightening a rope around my own neck. Leaving either behind felt worse. City air was wet with autumn smoke and taxi exhaust as I stepped into it. Every stranger's glance scraped my skin. A man reading a newspaper on the corner, a woman fiddling with her umbrella, all of them could be eyes. I kept moving. Central Park was half deserted, branches dripping, paths slick. The pond lay ahead, its surface black glass rippling with rain. A bench waited under a crooked lamppost, light sputtering like a bad lie. I sat. 8:05. Nothing. At 8:10, Julia emerged from the trees. No umbrella, no coat buttoned. Just her hair plastered, eyes darting. She looked smaller, like the city had eaten her confidence in one bite. "You came," she said, lowering herself onto the bench beside me. Her voice trembled despite the hard edge she tried to wear. "You called." She slid a folder onto my lap. "This is everything you need. Accounts, contracts, dates, proof that Richard wasn't freelancing. He was running systems for people far above him." I didn't open it. "Why give me this now?" Her hands twisted together. "Because if you don't publish, they'll hang it on you. North River, that sham nonprofit, you're listed as its sole officer. If this explodes, you go down as the architect." I felt my throat close. "They set me up." "Of course they did," Julia whispered. "That's how it works. They build exits for themselves, cages for everyone else." I finally opened the folder. Dozens of transfers, offshore shells, payments to names I recognized from news anchors and billboards, and Richard's signature, neat as ever, running like a spine through the corruption. "You were part of this," I said quietly, her shoulders hunched. "I thought I could steer it, keep it from swallowing you." "You slept with him." "I know," her voice cracked. "And I hate myself for it. But Richard, he was leverage. He trusted me more than anyone. That's how I kept eyes on him, on what he was building." "You expect me to believe this was for me?" My laugh was sharp. "That betrayal was protection." Julia turned to me, rain sliding down her cheeks like tears. "Believe what you want, but you need to understand this is bigger than either of us. These accounts, they fund things you don't want to imagine. Violence, elections, wars dressed up as charity drives. And if you're holding the proof, you're already on their kill list." Her words thudded inside me. Grandpa's letter, the ledger, the photos, they all pointed here, to this black pond under a broken lamppost. "I should go to the FBI, I said. "They'll bury it," Julia snapped. "Half their pensions are tied to these names. You hand it over, you disappear, and the machine keeps running." "Then what?" I demanded. "Publish," she said. "Leak it where no one can kill it. Newspapers, international networks, every outlet at once. Make it so wide they can't shut it down. And you," she gave a tired smile. "Maybe I burn with it. Maybe I run, I don't know anymore." Silence hung between us, heavy as the rain. Somewhere a dog barked, lonely and sharp. Julia stood, pulling her coat tight. "Choose fast, Victoria, because they've already chosen you." She walked away into the trees, her figure swallowed by the dark. I sat frozen, folder clutched to my chest. A twig snapped behind me, too close. I turned. Two figures stepped from the shadows, umbrellas low, faces hidden. "MS, Park," one of them said. His tone was polite. Too polite? I rose slowly, folder in hand, heart pounding. The pond rippled as if it knew blood was about to join the rain. "MS, Park," the man repeated, voice velvet over wire. The other adjusted his umbrella so the lamplight flashed off a black earpiece. "Wrong bench," I said, lifting my phone chest high, thumb poised as if I were live streaming. "Also wrong target. Everything you want is already off-site." A pause, small but real. "We're couriers," he said mildly. "A receipt only." "Then take this," I said, angling the phone so his face filled the screen. A message, "Try me again," and the drip turns to flood. Behind them, a jogger and a Labrador splashed past, the dog shaking rain onto expensive wool. The moment fractured. I stood, folder under my coat, bag on my shoulder, and walked, not fast enough to look scared, not slow enough to invite the touch at the elbow that ends badly. They didn't follow. Maybe the camera I pretended to hold had a longer barrel than the one in my bag. I didn't breathe until I hit fifth. I called Mitchell from a payphone that shouldn't have existed and did. "We start now," I said. No preamble, no mercy. "You're sure?" he asked, neither surprised nor relieved. "I'm past sure. We wrote the first piece like a manual, how money becomes water, how pipes are laid, how valves open where laws say there should be walls. No names, only a lattice anyone could trace if they wanted to see. The second piece named mid-tier men whose smiles were local legend. The third mapped a charity that fed the hungry on camera and starved budgets in footnotes. Switchboards lit. Anonymous prosecutors called Mitchell to say they had been meaning to look, meaning to act, meaning to remember why they took the job. Investors phoned lawyers who phoned yachts. One oligarch's boat lost power off the coast at dawn, a coincidence with helicopter blades in it. A server farm in Jersey accidentally burned. Our files lived elsewhere. I started moving. Safe house to safe house, each more boring than the last, boredom as armor. I slept in a dentist's cousin's sublet and a studio above a florist where the night smelled like damp peonies. I left nothing but wiped counters and a single bobby pin in a drain to tell myself I had been. Sometimes the strength I felt scared me. It wasn't the adrenaline spike I'd mistaken for courage in my 20s. It was the quiet of a river that has decided its path. Still, at 3 a.m., I woke with my mouth open and no sound, seeing the courthouse, Chiron, the yacht, the pond. Julia texted once from a number that changed as I read it. Your drip is working. But you're making weather. I typed, whose forecast? The bubble throbbed and died. I kept the phone in a metal tin like Grandpa had taught me to keep nails from rusting. Small acts that say I expect to be here tomorrow. On the 4th day, Mitchell slid a manila envelope across a diner booth. Arrange, he said. Private, off books, friend of a friend who's tired of guarding ghosts. I don't, I started. You do, he said, not unkind. Hands shaking doesn't look good on paper either. The range was a basement under an upholstery shop. The owner, ex-cop, eyes kind, watched me place the pistol on the bench like a sacred thing. Breathe in on the lift, he said. Out on the press. Just like the porch summer, just like nails. Just like nails, I repeated, and the memory came full. Grandpa's hand covering mine on a hammer, the nail standing straight because we did. I aligned the sights on a paper silhouette that looked less like a man than a decision. The first shot rattled my bones, the second less. The third lived in the soundproofing and didn't come back to haunt me. By the end of a box, my hands were still. On the 5th day, we named our first pillar, the judge with the houseplant integrity. The law school issued a statement so bloodless I wondered if their PR people had ever met blood. Students marched anyway. Someone chalked we deserve better in 18-inch letters on the courthouse steps, the rain trying and failing to wash it away. Sam texted for the first time in months. Heard about Richard. Are you okay? Drinks? Busy, I wrote. I keep getting calls. People asking about you. They say it's routine. Don't help them, Sam. She sent a selfie from the back of a black car, eyes wide. They already paid me. I thought it was for the rent. I'm sorry. The dots pulsed. They said you'd understand. I turned the phone face down and let the guilt arrive, then let it go. The machine ate the weak and the willing the same way. I didn't have to be either. At dusk, I took a taxi to the warehouse. If Grandpa's car had been my door out, it could be my vault too. I left the cab 6 blocks early and cut through a tire yard and a seam of river reeds that hid rats and confidence. I let myself in and shut the door twice until the lock clicked. Hey, beautiful, I told the tarps, because talking to the car felt less like superstition than respect. I keyed the seat and fed it new film. A micro SD with the 5 names, a notarized copy of the ledger's map, photos of signatures I'd only touch with gloves. I added a second drive with a letter to myself in plain language, to explain in case someone else opened this and needed to know why I had tried. The place was quiet, but not dead. The tea thermos was gone, the wiped desk still wore a cleaner patch like a ghost hand. I sat on the pallet and let the old air fill me. In the dark, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. Strength is stubborn, and my mother's softer one, be kind even to yourself. And the child version of Julia telling me she'd punch anyone who made fun of my glasses. I was a museum of voices. I could tour them or let them tour me. Tonight, I let them guide my hands. On the way out, my burner buzzed with a new number that knew my name. No text, just an image loading slow on the cheap screen, pixel by pixel. Gray blocks became brick shadow, a door I knew by the scrapes of the padlock. Then my shape in the frame, hood up, bag on shoulder, one hand on metal. The timestamp was 20 minutes old. The second image arrived before my finger found the power. This time the angle was higher, cleaner, patient as a bird of prey. A subject line followed from no one. Nice car. The phone buzzed in my palm like it was alive. The second photo, me caught in the act of leaving the garage, burned on the tiny screen. Subject line, nice car, no name, no demand, just a reminder they saw me. I powered the phone off, yanked the battery, and tossed both into the oily puddle outside the garage door. For a second, I watched the ripples spread, rain chewing at the cheap plastic like hungry teeth. Then I turned the key twice in the lock and walked away without looking back. By the time I reached Park Avenue, the city had changed. Not visibly, same taxis, same umbrellas jostling for space, same neon reflections smeared on wet asphalt. But I felt eyes. The kind that don't blink. Inside the apartment, the concierge gave me a polite nod, but I caught the flicker in his gaze, a half second too long on the bag slung over my shoulder. He knew something, or someone had told him to notice. I smiled anyway, forced it to reach my eyes. Upstairs, I went straight to the study. Safe still locked, files untouched. At least it looked that way. But the air smelled wrong, not dust and books. Aftershave, expensive, masculine. Richard, I breathed, my pulse skittered. I checked every room. No one, not a hair out of place, but the scent was real. My husband, my ex, had been here, or someone wearing his cologne. The landline rang. I jumped so hard the glass of water I just poured tipped, spilling across the desk. "Victoria," Richard's voice slid through the receiver, smooth as oil. "You've been busy." My grip tightened. "You broke into my apartment." "Our apartment," he corrected, amused. "Grandpa was generous, wasn't he? Did you think you were the only one he prepared? That old man loved his puzzles. And you?" His chuckle was low, cruel. "You were always the easiest piece to move." "Cut the riddles," I snapped. "What do you want?" "You," he said simply. "Alive, preferably. Cooperative, ideally. But disposable if necessary." A pause. "Julia says you're stubborn. I say you're scared. Either way, you've got something that doesn't belong to you. You mean the evidence of your crimes." "Don't be naive," he hissed now, mask slipping. "You think this is about me skimming off accounts. It's bigger than me. Bigger than you. You hand it over, you get to live. You don't." The silence after was colder than any threat. "I'll never give it to you," I said. "Oh, sweetheart," he sighed, mocking. "You already did. When you opened that garage. When you let yourself be seen, you think Mitchell can protect you. He's one article away from being irrelevant, and Julia, she's two choices from being a ghost." The line clicked dead. I stood shaking, receiver still pressed to my ear. The city hummed beyond the glass, unaware that my marriage had just ended again, this time with the promise of blood. That night I packed a second bag, smaller, lighter. Cash, fake passport, the bare minimum. I slid Grandpa's pistol into the side pocket, its weight both comfort and curse. Before dawn, I left the apartment through the service stairwell. The concierge called after me, voice too sweet. "Traveling again, MS Park?" I didn't answer. On the street, a cab slowed like it had been waiting for me. Too fast, too neat. I didn't take it. Instead, I ducked into the subway, swiped a single-use Metro card, and rode 3 stops the wrong way before surfacing. By noon, I was in a cheap motel in Queens, the kind where no one asks for ID as long as you pay in cash. The wallpaper peeled, the bed sagged, but the locks were mine. I pulled out the folder Julia had given me at the pond. Pages of names, accounts, handshakes disguised as charities. Every line was a fuse, every signature a match. At the bottom, I found something I'd missed before. A wire transfer signed not by Richard, not by Julia, but by someone else. Someone in government. A man I'd seen on TV swearing oaths to protect citizens like me. The money trail led straight to him. And in that moment I understood, Richard wasn't bluffing. This wasn't about him or Julia or even Grandpa. It was about the whole structure, and I had just stepped into its center. A knock rattled the thin motel door. 3 taps spaced evenly, my breath caught. "Room service," a voice called, "Mail, calm." I hadn't ordered anything. The gun was in my hand before I knew it, safety off. Another knock. Louder. I crept closer, pulse drumming in my ears. "MS Park," the voice said, and this time it was Richard's, smooth, familiar, terrifying. "I told you," he murmured through the door. "You already gave me what I wanted." The knob turned. The knob turned until the latch kissed the chain and stopped. Silence pressed against wood. Then a second sound, tiny, patient, metal teasing metal. I slid backward, gun up, sight line on the seam where door met jamb. The bedside lamp was already unplugged. The bathroom window had fought me that afternoon until Grandpa's old screwdriver convinced the swollen frame to remember its job. I tossed the motel Bible hard against the far wall. It smacked, fell open. The picking sound paused, listening, then resumed. "Room service," Richard said, amused. His voice traveled through cheap wood with the intimacy of a whisper in bed. "You always loved a surprise." I moved, 2 steps, bathroom, fingers under the sill. Cold air knifed my wrists. The fire escape looked like it had been welded by boredom and prayers. I swung a leg out, then the other, crouched low, and pulled the window almost shut behind me, leaving it open the width of a lie. The hallway door sighed, chain held, a palm hit wood. "Come on, Vic," he coaxed. "Let's talk like adults." I dropped to the next landing, boots bouncing rust, down one more into an alley of wet cardboard and last night's arguments. I ran, cutting left toward the laundromat glow. Inside, the heat was a slap, 8 dryers yawning red mouths. A kid in a varsity hoodie looked up, blinked, and returned to his phone. I fed quarters into a payphone bolted to a wall like a museum piece. Mitchell answered on the first ring. "You breathing?" "Barely. Where are you?" "Not a fair question," I said, voice too bright. "It's time." "For what?" "For what we promised each other if the door ever opened. We go wide, names, all 5. He was quiet for a beat, pen tapping. "Your sister is either in danger or part of the danger. Publish anyway. You understand what happens after we do this. It won't just be moral outrage and a few resignations." "I understand. It's either the world burns around the truth or I burn alone in a lie." Another beat, then, all right, 36 hours, staggered embargoes, simultaneous drops across outlets that hate each other on principle. Once it starts, there's no valve. Good, I said and meant it for the first time. And Victoria switched numbers again. The chatter says your name is attached to a charity you've never met. I met it today, I said. It tried to make me the patsy. We hung up. I bought a burner at the bodega next door and a stale muffin I didn't taste. Back in the motel, the door stood patient, chain intact. The aftershave was gone. On the bedspread lay a note written on hotel stationery, 2 words in Richard's precise hand. Nice try. The first story hit like a sober slap. No adjectives. No savior complex. Just a diagram of theft. Public money moving through private valves into pockets that already jingled. A foundation's name that hung on museum plaques like a sacrament, now floated in paragraphs about the purchase price of judges. The courthouse steps filled with umbrellas and questions. The second story named the judge. The third named a minister who preached thrift while his nephew flew private to dental school. The fourth peeled the skin off a charity that delivered blankets on camera and invoices to Bermuda. The fifth mapped the network's spine. The media owner, the serial king, the secretary with a biography fit for a stamp. Phones everywhere forgot how to be quiet. Someone leaked a letter from the pension board, insisting nothing was wrong while rebalancing into cash. A regional bank, temporarily limited withdrawals out of an abundance of caution. A law student I'd never meet turned her civil procedure final into a teach-in on graft. I watched from a motel bed, and then from a bus seat, and then from a kitchen stool in a borrowed apartment in Astoria that smelled like cumin and old song. Each time a headline scratched a different part of me raw. Not because the names were strangers, but because I knew which cereal was in the library break room, which orchestra played the Christmas fundraiser in our branch, which judge had shaken my hand after approving a children's reading grant. The text came like hail. You did this, be safe. They're saying you're jealous. They're saying you're foreign funded. They're saying you embezzled, that one from an unknown number with a link I didn't click. Sam wrote again, police were here. They asked where you get your books. I laughed. They didn't, I'm sorry. In the middle of it, a message from a contact I didn't know I had, no name, just a gray bubble and a sentence. Debt repaid. She didn't sell you, run. I stared until my eyes burned. I typed back, who are you? Where is she? The 3 dots appeared, pulsed, vanished. Then another bubble, a link, I tapped. The still was grainy from a security camera mounted above a deli. Night. Rain. A sedan idling, red brake light fog. 2 men in plain suits bracketing a woman whose head was down, hair sodden. She moved like someone who had learned to stand tall and was being taught by force to forget. Even blurry, I knew Julia's coat. A hand gripped her upper arm, no roughness, all ownership. On the sleeve, a small stitched emblem, a black triangle inside a circle. In the corner of the still, a watermark, Hawthorne Risk. The boutique firm news shows booked when they needed an independent security expert to talk about kidnappings in countries we only cared about when the kidnappings were American. Under the image, the sender had typed a location, 6 blocks from the conservatory pond. Timestamp, an hour after I'd left the bench. My chest went cold and hot in the same second. The motel room seemed to tilt. I swallowed bile and memory at once. Julia teaching me to swim by lying to me that she'd hold on and then letting go. Julia in a cafe with my husband, her hand over his like a secret. Julia standing in my kitchen, shaking, telling me I didn't understand what I had opened. The phone vibrated again. Another message from the ghost, if you're smart, you'll disappear. I closed my eyes. Grandpa on the porch, glass sweating in his palm. Strength isn't loud, kiddo. My mother's smaller voice, be kind, even to yourself. Somewhere beneath both, my own voice, the one I'd kept on mute for years, now at volume, bring her home. Mitchell called. You seeing this? He didn't need to say what this was. I am. We just dropped the secretary. The AG is on television pretending to be surprised. There's talk of grand juries. And there's talk, more whisper than talk, that a private team grabbed someone important in a park last night. The rumor mill thinks it's your sister. I have an image, I said. Hawthorne Risk. He whistled under his breath. A fashionable way to outsource a sin. I'm going to get her, I said, or I'm going to try. Victoria, don't. I surprised us both with the steadiness of it. You taught me how to publish. Grandpa taught me how to run. I have to learn the third thing myself. The third thing, how to do both and still be human. A beat, he exhaled. Then at least let me put a tail on you. They'll spot yours from space. They'll spot you faster, he said, and we both almost laughed. We hung up. I opened the safe house closet. On the shelf, the bag I'd packed and repacked, cash, utilities, the pistol that no longer rattled in my hand. I slid the 5 names back up into the lining and taped a letter to the inside of the cabinet door, a map of what to send where if I vanished. As I stepped into the hall, the upstairs neighbor cracked her door, a kid on her hip. You okay? She asked, eyes kind, wary. I will be, I said, and wondered if that was a promise or a prayer. At the curb, a rideshare idled, the driver checking his mirror, a rosary swinging from the dash. I opened my phone to order and froze. New message had popped onto the lock screen, no preview text, just a subject line that sucked all the air out of the street. Park 42, warrant executed, occupant detained. The sender was a news alert. The photo loading beneath it was my door on Park Avenue, broken open, the brass plaque of the foundation gleaming beside splinters. A woman's silhouette stood in the hall, hands behind her back. For a second, with the grain and the distance, she looked like me. Then the image sharpened just enough to make a different kind of fear bloom. It wasn't me. It was the concierge's weekend assistant, the girl who always slipped an extra smile into the elevator with my mail. She was crying. Under the photo, a caption, "Sources say warrant relates to North River Education LLC." The car's engine purred. The rosary knocked gently against the vent. I looked down at my bag, at my hands, at the city jawing open its morning like it didn't notice who was being eaten. "Where to?" the driver called. I lifted my eyes to the avenue and something in me stood up straight. The rideshare idled at the curb, the driver glancing back through the rosary swinging from his mirror. "Where to?" he asked again, voice patient but wary, as if he sensed the weight in my silence. "Queens," I lied, sliding into the seat. Astoria Boulevard. The city blurred past the window, neon smearing into dawn gray. I wasn't headed for Queens. My mind was already pulling threads tighter. The raid at Park Avenue, Julia taken or staged near the pond, Richard circling like a vulture. Every move smelled like misdirection, like someone had placed me in the middle of a chessboard where pawns were made of people. At a red light, my burner buzzed. Unknown number. One line of text, Pier 19. "Tonight. Come alone if you want your sister alive." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles cracked. A trap. It screamed trap. But the alternative, doing nothing, wasn't an option. Grandpa's words echoed in my bones. Strength isn't loud. It's stubborn. I left the rideshare early, ducked into a coffee shop, and scribbled a note for Mitchell. Slid it into an envelope with a flash drive of every file I hadn't already shared. If I didn't come back, the story would. I left it taped under his office mailbox slot. Insurance. By dusk, I was on foot at the waterfront. Pier 19 rose out of the fog like the spine of some dead beast, its planks slick with algae, gulls circling overhead. A lone lamp sputtered at the far end where a black SUV idled, engine purring. "Victoria," a voice called from the shadows. Not Richard's, colder, measured. A man in a tailored overcoat stepped forward, silver hair glinting. I knew the face from television, Senator Alden, the one who always thundered about protecting the taxpayer. He smiled without warmth. "You've made quite a mess," he said. "Names dropped, pillars shaken. And yet here you are, still clinging to the illusion that you're in control." "Where's my sister?" A gesture. The SUV's rear door opened. Julia stumbled out, wrists bound, eyes wide but defiant. Rain plastered her hair to her cheeks. "Alive," Alden said, "for now." Richard emerged next, smirking, a pistol loose in his hand. "Told you she couldn't resist." My own gun weighed heavy in my coat pocket. My heart thundered, but my voice came steady. "Let her go, you want me." "Not her," Richard chuckled. "Still playing saint, but saints die young, darling." "Enough," Alden snapped, his patience fraying. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I heard. "You have the files, originals, where are they?" "Safe," I said. "And if I don't check in by morning, they go everywhere, every outlet, every courtroom." His jaw tightened. "Insurance," he muttered. "Smart, just like your grandfather." The name hit me like a fist. "You knew him." "Knew him?" Alden's laugh was sharp. "Peter Thompson was one of us. He built half these systems, and he handed you the keys." Julia let out a strangled sound, half laugh, half sob. "I told you, Victoria, you don't know the half of it." Richard pressed the gun to her temple. "Last chance. Hand over the originals, or she's nothing but memory." I raised my weapon, hands steady now, the rain dripping off the barrel like tears. "You shoot her, and the world burns with your name first." For a long moment, the pier was nothing but water slapping wood, gulls crying overhead, 4 lives tangled in a knot too tight to cut clean. Then Julia moved. Fast, she kicked sideways, heel slamming into Richard's knee. He staggered, cursing, and the gun clattered to the planks. "Run," she screamed. Chaos detonated, shots cracked. Wood splintered. I dropped, firing blind, the recoil jolting my shoulder. Alden shouted something I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. Julia lunged for me, chains clinking. We scrambled behind a piling as bullets tore sparks from the metal. "Victoria," Richard's voice was a snarl now. "You won't leave this pier alive." I pressed my back to the wet wood, chest heaving, gun trembling but still ready. Julia's hand found mine, blood slick on her fingers. "What now?" she gasped. I looked at her, then out at the fog swallowing the pier, at the shadows closing in. "We fight," I said. "We fight, and we make damn sure the truth doesn't die here." And then I rose, weapon leveled, the night exploding around me.